Okay, this video is an extension of the parenting lesson, and for this one, rather than parenting our objects to another object, we're actually going to be using the circles, which you can find under modify, under create and nerf primitives. And I'm just going to be using these circle objects rather than assigning the parenting to other 3D objects in my robotic arm. And again, the reason for this, because it's going to make it a little more practical for me to be able to select objects and to assign constraints and things of that nature. And again, this is a practice that's used a lot in the when it comes to animation. Getting in the habit of creating controls for things is something that you want to get used to. So what I want to do is take all of these controls, and again, one thing that I didn't mention in the last video is that it makes things a lot easier if you label things. So for instance, all of these parts are labeled. It makes sense for you to be able to label the controls that you're going to assign, and so you can actually find them in your outliner and things like that. So we're going to be using a little bit of a combination of the last two lessons that we created here. We're going to be using the align and snapping tools to align the controls to these objects. Alright, and then I'm going to be using parenting to make sure that the objects are followed based on the pivot of this specific controls. Okay. Now, another reason why it's easier like this is because again, you don't have to go through the hassle of maybe changing the pivot of the object, but you can just do it on based on the pivot of a primitive nerve circle like this. So let's just go ahead and begin. This basically, again, just like in the last lesson, we're gonna need a main control that's gonna kind of control everything. And again, maybe to make it a little bit more clear this time, rather than starting on the base, I'm probably gonna start on the claws and just kind of move my way up. Okay, and again, it's just to give you the sense of the hierarchy that I've been kind of mentioning. Alright, so the first two controls that I want to assign, and again, none of these are labeled, so I can just use whichever, are the ones that are going to control the rotation of my claws here. Okay, so as long as they're rotating from the center of the cylinder, I think wherever I put these controls would work. Okay, so let's see how we're going to be doing this. I can do this a couple ways. I can select, now let me just turn on my wireframe so I can see them as I'm doing this. I can use my snapping tool and align them on the vertices that are at the corner of the cylinder, like this. Okay, one on one side, the other one on the other. Okay, and that's gonna work just fine like that, location wise at least. Then I'm going to turn off my snapping tool. I'm going to rotate them 90 degrees. So I'm going to go here and just type 90. Alright, same with this one. Alright. Let's try this again. Must be 90 on the Z. There we go. Okay, so Now what I gotta do before I parent these claws to each one of these, it's basically I need to make sure that these controls are freeze transformed, just like I freeze transform my objects. And again, the reason for that is because if we look at the attributes, or if I look at my channel box, there's going to be a lot of changes here. Alright, it's a lot easier for me when it comes to animation to be able to zero out some of these attributes to make it go back to its default position, rather than having to guess any of these numbers that we have right here. So again, before I do anything, modify and freeze transform. Alright, so now if I select the controls, these are going to be at 0, 0, 0. Okay, so I can just come here and I'm just going to copy the names of the actual 3D object. So I'm going to call this one, I think I'll label some of these. I'm just going to label this control claw 2, and this one's going to be control claw 1. Alright. Okay, and we're going to, now that these are freeze transformed, then I can just start parenting the object to the actual control. So this one being for the second claw right here, I'm going to select this object, select the control that's going to be the parent, and click on P. Alright, same with this one, the claw, then the control, P. Alright, so now the rotation of these of this claw is going to be dependent on the rotation and the pivot of this control right here. Alright, and again, if I want to put it back into default position, I can just type 0 here and it'll bring it back to its default position. Now we're gonna have a bunch of different controls here. Okay, so one of the things that I want to do, just to kind of make things maybe less confusing, is maybe change the color of the spline or the curves. So for that, I'm going to go into the attribute editor. Under object display, I want to go to draw and overrides, and I want to enable the overrides and just change the color. Alright, so by default it's at a blue. You can give this any color you want. Alright, again, just to kind of make it easy for you to differentiate between the controls if you have to. So just know that you can do that. Alright, so the next control that I want to create is the one for this piece of mechanical. I'm just going to move it up and down. So I'm going to take this control and I'm going to align it to this object. So modify, align tool. Alright, and let's just again try and find the right points that we need. Alright, so that's going to work really well right there. So again, before I parent, I select the object. I want to freeze transform it. Okay, so now everything is back at zeros. Then I can take oh wait, I think I need to create a control for the wrist as well. Yeah, maybe I should do that first. Hold on one second. So Control D, and again, this is why the hierarchy is very important. So let's just again, we're gonna align an object here to this wrist. Okay, so let's just do that. Okay, so I want to take this and I want to rotate it 90 degrees. 90. Alright. And again, I can change the color. In this case, I'm just going to maybe scale it down. Okay, and this is going to be the wrist control. Okay, and so what I'm going to do now, okay, and again, on the last video we kind of parent things to other things. When everything needs to, in this video we're parenting everything to controls. All right, so what we need to do again is make sure that basically the hierarchy is based on the controls and not necessarily the objects. So the objects are going to be parented to the controls, but then the hierarchy kind of need to happen within these spline objects in order to follow along. All right, and again, let me just kind of show you what that means. This object would need to be parented to the wrist control. Okay, and now we're gonna take these two controllers that for the claws, and we're gonna parent them to the wrist control. All right, so what's gonna happen now is that any movement that I do with the wrist control, this object and both controls for the claws are going to follow along. And again, one of the mistakes that I made here is that I forgot to freeze transform my object. So again, that could be a problem. So you can see here we still have scale information, position information, rotation information. So I'm going to do this. Okay, make sure that this is freeze transformed before I do anything to it. Select this wrist again. Alright, parent that, and then select these two guys, parent them to the wrist. And now if I select this one, again everything's going to be zeros, scale 1. These are going to follow along. Alright, and it's not just rotation but also position. Alright, so now I want to make it so the wrist control is following the control that's going to pretty much elevate this arm. Okay, so I have this control right here. It's already freeze transformed. I'm going to take this part, parent it to this one. Okay, then I'm going to take the wrist control and parent it to the control that it's going to be moving this part. Okay, so now if I want to move my claw up and down, all I have to do is move this control and everything's going to follow along. Okay, now the next control that I want to assign is for this joint right here. Okay, so let's just use this one, and again I can just use my align tool here, modify, there you go. Okay, so now I need to find the right points for this to align correctly. And perhaps this one I want to rotate 90 degrees. Like this. Alright, so now that it's in the right position, we select them, modify, freeze transformations. Alright, and then I'm going to do two things. I need to make sure that this piece of geometry is following along with that control, and I need to do the same thing with this one. So I can do one or two things. I can select this object and parent it to this one, or I can select this both and just assign them to this control. So I'm just going to do that. So P. Alright, so now these two objects are going to follow along with this control, but to make sure that everything else is following along with that control, I'm just going to select this control, which these other controls are parented to, and then parent it to this one. Alright, so now everything that's parented to this control is going to follow along with this one as well. Okay. So So, and again, we need to kind of start doing the same thing with this control right here. So let's just go into this one and let's align it. Okay, and again the rotation for this one like that is fine because it's going to be moving from side to side. So I'm going to freeze transform it. Then I want to make sure that everything that needs to follow along is parented to it. So these two objects need to follow along with this control because everything else is parented to it. Okay, so I'm going to select these two parts, then select that control and then parent it. Okay, so now this arm is going to follow along with the control. Alright, but now we need to make sure that everything else is, so I'm going to select this control and then parent it to this one. So now if I select this one, everything that's been parented on this hierarchy is going to follow along. Alright, and okay, so I want to have another control for this shoulder right here. So let's just do one more alignment here. Align tool. And let's just make sure we find the right points. Now this control is just gonna kind of control the rotation of that joint right there. So I don't really need it to be aligned to the center of it. So I'm just gonna move it up a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to go to modify freeze transformations. Okay, then what I need to do is select this part and this part and then parent it to this control, and then select this control which everything else has been parented to and then parent it to this one. Alright, so now this control is pretty much controlling the rotation of the whole arm right there. And the last thing that I want to do is, again, maybe get rid of these two that I didn't use. And I want to create a control that pretty much moves the whole arm around. Okay, so just like I did before, I'm just going to use the align tool. Alright, and just find the right points for this to align. Alright, that's pretty good. And so now we're going to take this control, which everything has been parented to, and parent it to the subject. Alright, so if I select that control, is going to show like it's selecting the whole thing, but also need to parent this to this control so it follows along as well. Alright, so we just use again the parenting technique, the aligning, and the snapping to be able to kind of rig this mechanical arm the way we want to. And we also use the freeze transform to make sure that all of the attributes are at zeros and ones for the scale. Alright, so now with this simple rig, I'm going to be able to start creating the animation. And that's going to be in the following video.